The courtroom in Tampa, Florida, had seen many legal battles, but no one expected what happened that morning. Pam Bondi, a sharp and experienced attorney, walked into the courthouse, briefcase in one hand and adjusting her blazer with the other. This was supposed to be a simple hearing, something she could handle in her sleep. But as she walked to the defendant's table, she felt the judge's eyes on her before he even spoke. Judge Alan Prescott, a serious and strict man, was staring at something just below her collarbone, a small gold cross necklace. The air in the room changed. Then, in a firm voice, the judge spoke. "Miss Bondi, I must remind you that religious symbols have no place in my courtroom." Pam barely reacted. "Your Honor, you're wearing a cross. That violates the neutrality of this space. You'll need to remove it or face a fine." A quiet murmur spread through the small crowd. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The clerk glanced nervously at the judge, then at Pam. This wasn't the first time a judge had enforced strange rules, but it was the first time someone had been fined over a necklace. Pam stood her ground. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but my cross is no different than a wedding ring or a locket with a family photo inside." Judge Prescott's face was unreadable. "That's not how I see it," he said. "Either remove it or I'll issue a fine." Pam had never been fined before, not for breaking rules, not for misconduct. But now, she was being fined for wearing a small piece of jewelry. The fine itself didn't matter. What it stood for did. Pam calmly folded her hands over her briefcase. She wasn't going to let this go. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to address this issue formally." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Address it?" "Yes. I will be filing an objection, and I would like to state my argument on record." Judge Prescott smirked. "Miss Bondi, this hearing is about a business dispute, not your personal grievances." Pam didn't flinch. "I'm also aware that the First Amendment doesn't take a recess for personal opinions." The judge leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The courtroom was now completely silent. Pam was challenging the judge's authority. To his face, she looked him straight in the eye. "You're fining me for wearing a cross. Let's break that down legally, shall we?" Judge Prescott sighed, rubbing his temples, but before he could speak, Pam reached into her briefcase. She wasn't just going to argue, she was going to dismantle his entire reasoning. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table, slowly, deliberately. "Miss Bondi," the judge said, sounding tired, "I don't have time for theatrics." Pam didn't blink. "Neither do I, Your Honor. But I do have a firm understanding of constitutional law." The judge sat forward, fingers laced together. "You're fining me for wearing a cross, saying it violates courtroom neutrality. But tell me, Your Honor, what legal precedent are you basing that on?" Silence. The court reporter was waiting. The bailiff barely moved. Judge Prescott took a slow breath. "This courtroom operates under my authority, Miss Bondi." Pam nodded. "It does, but that authority is not above the Constitution." She tapped the paper in front of her. "Under the First Amendment, personal religious expression is protected, especially when it does not disrupt proceedings." The judge scoffed. "You're an attorney, not a law professor." Pam smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then let's talk case law, shall we?" She picked up the paper. Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969. A landmark case that proved people don't lose their constitutional rights when they enter government spaces, whether that's a school or a courtroom. Prescott's jaw tightened. He knew that case. Every lawyer did. Pam continued. West Virginia State Board of Education vs. Barnett, 1943. The Supreme Court ruled that forcing people to remove personal symbols of belief is a violation of their First Amendment rights. She set the paper down. "Now, Your Honor, would you like me to keep going? Or would you prefer to reconsider that fine?" The judge tapped his fingers on the chair. He was cornered. Finally, he looked at the clerk. "Mark the fine as pending review." Pam smirked. "I'll take that as a temporary victory." But she wasn't done. She had drawn a line in the sand. And now, the judge had two choices: stick with his weak argument and risk public embarrassment, or find a way to backtrack without looking weak. He tried to argue. "Courtroom rules exist for a reason." Pam didn't let up. "You mean like wedding bands? Or lapel pins?" The judge tensed. "Or the time you allowed a lawyer to wear a pink ribbon for breast cancer awareness?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. Prescott shot them a glare, but the damage was done. Pam crossed her arms. "So tell me, Your Honor, why does this rule only apply to my cross?" Prescott clenched his jaw. He had no answer. Finally, after what felt like forever, he exhaled sharply. "The fine is rescinded," he muttered. Pam smiled. "Much appreciated, Your Honor." But this wasn't just about a fine anymore. The courtroom had turned into a spectacle. A local reporter, covering a different case, heard about what happened and published an article online. Florida judge tries to fine attorney for wearing a cross, but it doesn't go as planned. Pam's phone buzzed, again and again. Lawyers, journalists, even former law school classmates were reaching out. But this wasn't about headlines. This was about personal freedoms, and whether a judge could take them away just because he wanted to. The aftermath. The next morning, Pam's assistant, Lauren, rushed into her office. "You need to see this." She handed Pam a tablet. The Florida Bar Association had issued a statement. Judges have the right to maintain decorum in their courtrooms. While attorneys are allowed personal expression, they must respect the rules set forth by presiding judges. Pam exhaled. This wasn't just a statement. It was a warning. Prescott was working behind the scenes. Lauren hesitated. "There's more." She handed Pam a document. A formal complaint had been filed against her. Pam read the accusations: disrupting courtroom proceedings, challenging judicial authority inappropriately, engaging in behavior unbecoming of an attorney. Pam laughed. Unbecoming? This was retaliation. Prescott wasn't done. He was trying to punish her for standing up to him. Pam wasn't going to let that happen. She picked up her phone and called Lisa Reynolds, a journalist known for exposing judicial misconduct. "Lisa, I need you to listen carefully." The next day, the news exploded. Florida judge faces backlash after trying to punish attorney for wearing a cross. Legal experts tore apart Prescott's argument. The Judicial Review Board announced an investigation into his actions. Prescott gave a weak statement to the press, but it was too late. He had already lost where it mattered most: his credibility. Pam took a sip of her coffee and smiled. She hadn't just won for herself. She had sent a message: never let anyone take away your rights without a fight.